Greetings, brothers. Today we're talking about one of my favourite models in Warhammer 40,000, the super heavy tank destroyer relic Falchion. We're going to check it out and compare it up against the Castellan. Stick around, this is going to be a fun video. So let's get into it, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll know exactly which one of these two ginormous models you might want to include in your army. And the Castellan, obviously Knight Codex just came out recently, so it's a good one to look at. It is a gorgeous model, and I guess there are some third-party upgrade kits you can get for it to make it look even more Blood Angels, and if you want to join our Discord, I can tell you all about them. Anyway, this is my Falchion. I've used it a bunch of times, and it's undefeated in 9th edition, so I enjoy playing it. It works well as fire support for Blood Angels, and let's get into it. So if we start with the Falchion, and when I run it, I recommend you use something like the following loadout. Obviously it comes with a twin Volcano cannon. That is your strength 14 minus 5, flat 6 damage, heavy 2d3 in its blast. It's Titanic, you're going to get to reroll your wound rolls. And remember, because this is Titanic, there's no penalty in falling back and shooting. So even if they do get you into combat, you can just fall back, you can shoot. There's no negative in this gun being blast. I also take 2 laser destroyers. I just think they're much more reliable than the swingy damage of a las cannon. The laser destroyers are obviously strength 10 minus 4 d3 plus 3, and it gets 6 shots, which is a very good amount of d3 plus 3 shots. We also have a twin heavy bolter on there. I mean, kind of take it or leave it. I usually use it to try and kill some chaff. Maybe you could fire it into the heavy targets you're going after if you just want to do a wound or 2. And then it does have crushing tracks, which are not bad, because you're going to get 6 attacks, you're going to have a 5-up weapon skill, you're going to get your Blood Angels keywords here, so that means you are going to get Shock Assault, you are going to get Savage Echoes, so potentially that gives you 8 attacks on minus 3 d3 damage. So if required later in the game, you can make some charges with this thing and you can do some decent damage. Obviously Armor of Contempt has recently been added, making it even stronger than when I was using it, essentially letting it ignore 1 point of AP. And I would say the big problem with this before was that it had no invulnerable save. So typically you might need to run like a Librarian to give it an invulnerable save. Well, maybe you don't need to do that now, because essentially even if they're hitting you at minus 4, you're on a 5-up, which is the invulnerable save that your Librarian would be giving you anyway. So unless they're hitting you with minus 5, this is a very, very survivable unit. 26 wounds as well, and obviously can be really buffed with a Tech Marine. Comes some key stratagems in there as well. It's got Smokescreen, can make it harder to hit. I don't know how you can make it harder to hit when it's literally like the size of a shoebox, but you can smokescreen it. And then obviously if you are on low wounds, you can pay 2 CP for Power of the Machine Spirit and operate on full profile, which can be pretty tasty, meaning that if they ever leave it even on just 1 wound, this thing can be absolutely deadly. And I think a lot of people don't know how to play against this when they're playing against a Blood Angels army, because it's like, do you go after the big melee threat or do you go after this? And it can kind of confuse some people. So let's get into the Castellan, and for this we're going to be using the Plasma Decimator. We're going to take 2 Shieldbreaker missiles. Remember, they can only be shot once per turn. We're going to run the twin Meltaguns times 2. We're going to run 2 Siegebreaker cannons. We're going to run the Volcano Lance and the Titanic Feet. And there's a bunch of different household traits that you can pick, but the one that I'm going to suggest that might be really good with this is Hunter of Beasts, and we're going to come to that in a little while. But basically what Hunter of Beasts is going to do for you is it's going to let you get +1 to your attack roll when you're attacking monsters or vehicles, and it's going to get you +1 to your damage roll against Titanic. There are some other options there, some more survival ones, and you can obviously check these all out if you own the Knight Codex, or I guess on Wikipedia, however you like to check out rules. It's going to cost you 3 CP, so essentially 1 more CP than it will cost you to take the Falchion. And then there is some great stratagems. There's so many stratagems for the Imperial Knights, I guarantee you check them out. You can give it a 4-up invulnerable save with a Rotate Iron Shield. You can prevent mortal wounds on a 5-up, similar to Armor of Contempt. I know that's a confusing name, but that's what it's called for the Falchion, to prevent mortal wounds. And then Calculated Targeting is 4 CP, but it's just disgusting, and it basically says if you make any 6s on your wound rolls, you don't do the damage, you just do the damage as mortal wounds. So if you shot your Volcano Lance at an enemy, d6 +8, and you make a 6 on your wound roll, then for your damage, D6 plus 8 is just mortal wounds, and that's for every gun it's got. It's crazy for CP, but it's crazy how many mortals it could do. Anyway, so the Castellan's coming in very similar points. I think 5 points more expensive than the Falchion. Couple more wounds. Obviously, it's got Ion Shields, giving a 5 up invulnerable save against ranged attacks. The Falchion's going to be better against low EP weaponry, but the Castellan's going to be better against high EP weaponry at range. In melee, I guess the Falchion wins them both. I imagine most of the time the enemy are going to be going after these in range. They are not melee units. Yes, you can get into melee. Yes, you can do some damage in melee, but these are much more fire support units. And quite often in Blood Angels lists, I've said that if you bring 500 points of fire support, you can actually build a really balanced and synergized list. You know, we have a lot of melee threat, we have forward deploy, we have ways to get all around the map, and then you bring this fire support and it kind of balances everything out. And I think both of these units will do that, but let's get into some maths and decide which unit is actually best. So survivability, and basically what I just said is 100% right. On the low AP weaponry, so -1, -2, -3, the Falchion's going to be ahead on all of those, just because it can ignore the 1 AP, and then even with the less wounds, it's just going to be ahead. Against high AP weaponry, then your Castellan's going to get ahead, because it can only ever be affected essentially by -3. So against, like, I've kind of used their own weapons against them. So the twin Volcano cannon from the Falchion, the Volcano lance from the Castellan, and you can see here, I guess this is maybe 20% more survivable against these high-end weapons, and then about 10% more survivable against stuff like Dark Lances, D cannons, Tau Plasma. So it really depends on, I think, what the enemy's got to kill you with. But if you're going into this as a take-all corners list, and you want to fight, you don't know who you're going to be fighting against, you're going to a tournament, then I guess that's just something to bear in mind. The Falchion could be buffed with something like Shield of Sanguinius to probably make it keep up. The question is, do you need to do that? I mean, it's still pretty darn survivable. I guess there's not... The enemy would literally need to have 2 Castellans to kill this in a single turn with a Volcano Lance. I don't think anyone's running 2 Castellans, so you're pretty confident it's going to survive 1 turn against most things. So a couple of turns of shooting from this thing can do an insane amount of damage and can sometimes win you the game, let alone... Yeah, I mean, the numbers here are good. You know, surviving against 18 Dark Lances. Well, if you think of like an Elder army with, I don't know, like 6 bolts and like maybe 6 guys inside the bolts. I mean, they're not all hitting. And this is basically the number of wounds required to kill. So they would need to wound you 18 times with Dark Lances. So how many Dark Lances do they need to make 18 wounds? Well, they probably need 26, I don't know, even 30. They've got like a 3-up ballistic skill, so yeah, probably 30 Dark Lances. I mean, are they ever going to get 30 Dark Lances on your Falchion in a turn? I'd say no. So you're pretty golden. I mean, can they get 10 Dark Lances on your Falchion in a turn? If they only get 10 Dark Lances, then they only wound 6 times. They only take a third of its hit points. It's still in full bracket. So I guess that's just something to keep aware of. Same with D cannons. You know, like no one's got enough D cannons to get 11 shots off, or 11 successful wound rolls on the Falchion. Like no one's got that, I feel like. So these things are typically going to survive one turn, maybe even 2, maybe even 3. If they survive 3 turns, I think you win the game. If the enemy's been focusing on them, because the rest of your army will just be crushing them. And against low arms fire, they're generally... Low arms fire does nothing against these things. I mean, yeah, if the enemy's got like a bunch of Gauze Reapers or a bunch of like who runs Plasma Exterminators? That's Inceptors. You know, the most shots you can get out of Inceptors is 18. Realistically, you get 12 per squad. Maybe you run 2 squads or 6-man Inceptors. You can only do half the damage to this thing. Yeah, I really like it. I think both these things are more survivable than they used to be. Let's get into how much firepower they can do then. So I usually break this down, and I have to do a couple of slides to work everything out. But this week we're gonna look at monsters and vehicles primarily, because I think that's why you take these things, to deal with monsters and vehicles. And I've put a bunch of common picks on the screen, right? So the Orc Buggies, Drukhari Raiders, Leviathan Dreads, Black Templar Redemptors, because they're the thing that got Redemptors increasing points, Mortarion, Telemons, and then we put the 2 units on there as well that we're actually comparing. And then I did another slide looking at all the guns for the Castellan, which results in this slide. If you want to see the previous 2 slides, stop, because they're really just working out for this slide. So this is basically the fire support slide. So what I've decided what I mean by fire support is 36 inches. So the Castellan has some other guns, the twin melt guns, that only have 12 inches. So they're excluded from this comparison. So this is if you are 36 inches away. Both tanks will essentially have all their other guns available. Well, the tank and the knight, I guess. And this is how much damage you will do. Bear in mind the Castellan is going to cost you 5 more points and 1 more CP. So what it looks like is against the heavier toughness stuff, so like toughness 7 and typically an invulnerable save, the Falchion tank destroyer is ever so slightly ahead. You're talking like 2% ahead against Telemons, maybe 10% ahead against other Falchions or Knights, maybe not even 10%, 5%. It's tiny. And against the slower targets, the difference swings the other way, 5 or 10%. So at 36 inches, which I imagine is what you're building these things for, you're not factoring in the fact that the Knight Castellan has 4 12-inch melta guns. It's great that it's got those melta guns, and we'll come back to those melta guns in a minute. But if you imagine most of the game, turn 1, turn 2, maybe even turn 3, when this thing is alive, it's going to be 36 inches away from the enemy. You probably want it 36 inches away so it can outrange maybe enemy multi-meltas or something, you know, that's going to cause it big problems, and it's just going to open fire. And this is the damage it's going to do, and its damage is pretty darn tasty. What I did say, a really interesting household tradition for this knight is the Hunter of Beasts. And in the Hunter of Beast tradition, we basically get +1 to attack, +1 to hit on all our attacks against vehicles and monsters, which is everything on this list, and we get +1 damage into Titanic. So obviously that changes this whole situation a little bit, and I think Hunter of Beasts, obviously it's going to have some weaknesses, like if you play against Tau, then Hunter of Beasts is going to have no value because they're all infantry, but if you're... I still think it's a good choice, Hunter of Beast. It's one of my favourites. It's one of the ones that we didn't cover in the video we made a few weeks back, but having reread the Household Traditions, I actually really like Hunter of Beasts. So what that does change is it basically means that the Castellan now is going to be about 20%, maybe slightly even 30%, just better at killing all these things than the Falchion. And 20% on a fire support unit, in some cases down here against like other knights or the Falchion itself, it's more like 40% actually. It's a big increase. If you're enjoying today's video, please hit that like button. And my analytics is actually telling me that there's a good portion of people that watch my videos that aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. Just click the big red button. It's very easy to do. I do really appreciate it. Alright, back to today's video. So miraculously, all the percentage increases have just appeared. So you can see it's quite a bit ahead of the Falchion, and that's before you add in the damage that you can get if you're ever within 12 inches. So if you're ever within 12 inches, you're going to, I mean, if you look at this against another heavy destroyer, you're literally getting another 25% damage on top of your already 38% ahead. So is the Castellan like a legit choice right now? I totally think it is. I mean, yes, it's not going to be strong, like I said, if you're into Tau or something that doesn't have a lot of monsters or vehicles, or Titanic, I guess. But if you're into one of those armies, which I think a lot of armies have those things, then you're actually in really good shape for including one of these in Blood Angels. The only negative I can really see is the extra CP cost. But I suppose the one thing that I want to say as well is when I ran my Falchion a lot, and I think I ran it to 10 wins in a row, it's undefeated for me, I ran it every game with a Tech Marine. So what changes if we factor in the Tech Marine? So if we bring the Tech Marine back in, you can see straight away that then the Falchion jumps up again to, it's ahead on these 4 ones at the bottom. Not quite, it's ahead on 4 in the middle. The bottom and the top, it's right there with it before you include the melta guns again. The melta guns are sort of like the tipping point that are just going to make the Castellan much better. Downside obviously with the melta guns is that 12-inch range. The Tech Marine's obviously going to be able to repair the Falchion, and the other cool thing about the Tech Marine, I guess, is he could take something like Soul Warden to grant it like a permanent shrug against mortals, and the Tech Marine is going to give the +1 to hit regardless of what you're fighting, where the +1 to hit from the Castellan is only going to come against monsters and beasts. not monsters and beasts, monsters and infantry, from that Hunter of Beasts trait. That's not confusing at all, by the way. Okay, it wouldn't be 40k if it was nice and easy and simple to understand. Anyway, let's move on to the next slide. Melee. So both units have similar melee profile. They're both strength 8, they're -2. Falchion's got 6 attacks, but he would also get Shock Assault and Savage Echoes, meaning that he could essentially have 8 attacks at -3. He has D3 damage with a weapon skill of 5+, it doesn't degrade. Castellan has 4 attacks with weapon skill 4+, it does degrade, and he's flat 2 damage. So, I mean, potentially, on average, that means you're hitting twice with a Castellan. If you don't charge, you're hitting twice with the Falchion. But if you charge, you're probably hitting like 2.6 times. You've got a better AP with the Falchion. So it does give the Falchion the edge, but then you obviously have to factor in those 2 twin melta guns, and that would instantly make the Castellan be the better choice again. So in terms of raw damage, it's really looking like the Castellan is better, but I guess there's some more utility that you would get with the Falchion. So when I ran the Falchion, and I guess this probably goes for if you want to run both or either, you probably need a battalion, right? Because you're going to spend 2 or 3 CP before you even get going. If you include 3 times 5-man Incursor squads, and I do think Incursors are still the best troops for Blood Angels, then you're left with just over basically like 1,050 points, give or take, for the rest of your army. When I ran this successfully, I did go back and find the lists that I was running, and it was 8 Sanguinary Guard, it was 5 Death Company, it was 8 Vanguard Veterans, Dante, a Tet Marine, a Librarian Dreadnought. But this was, and then obviously the Incursors and the Falchion itself. This was around 18 months ago, so points costs have changed, so it wouldn't make a whole heap of sense sharing that list now. However, Dante I did think was quite a cool choice for this, and if you guys watch my videos, you'll know I never run Dante, but gaining back the 1 CP could actually be pretty cool, just because you do want to spend some CP on the Falchion, you want to keep it alive, you want to have it operating at full profile all the time. If you do that, and if it survives a couple of turns, it just does so much damage that it can kind of take over the game itself. Even just speaking about it now is getting me excited to run the Falchion again. So I've made a final slide with pros and cons of both. Okay, if we come down to some sort of conclusion on which one I think you should include in your list, I think ultimately it's going to have to be you decide. I like both. I would include both. I don't have a Castellan, so I might include the Falchion, but let's get into the conclusion that I seem to draw. So I think the Castellan is a very validated choice. I think it's a huge distraction Carnifex. If the enemy are shooting at range, it's going to take some serious fire to bring down, and you can also Ion Shield it to really give it that 4-up invulnerable save, which is going to make it pretty survivable. So they're going to have to commit a lot into it to kill it, and even that is difficult. It's going to be crazy good against monsters and vehicles if we take that Hunter of Beast Household Tradition. It can go to full profile for 2 CP, so even left on 1 wound, it's dangerous all hell. There's no way to be healed, and there's no real synergy with any of your other Blood Angels units, but I still think it's pretty tasty, and it's got some very expensive but interesting stratagems. And if you're in the UK, you can use Element Games to get one for £89, and there's always a link to Element Games in all my video descriptions. I do really appreciate if you're buying anything, if you click through those links, it does help support the channel. Let's talk about the super heavy Falchion Tank Destroyer. It's got a cooler name and is undefeated in the 10 games that I've used it in, so I mean, right there, that's probably a great reason to include it. It has a good synergy with a Tet Marine. With a bit of luck, it can do some decent melee damage, getting 8 attacks on the charge. It can be difficult to maneuver. It's got a very big footprint, and on heavier board setups, you might have trouble getting it round or getting the firing arcs that you need. It's going to deal similar damage to the Castellan. The Castellan is going to be better once it gets within 12 inches, but at that 36-inch fire support range I talked about, then they're going to be very similar. I guess if you are lucky and you go into a Monsters and Beasts list, the Castellan is going to do better for cheaper, but I guess the Tet Marine is going to be a more all-round, take-all-corners sort of list. It can also go full profile for 2 CP, and sometimes the Tet Marine just putting that flat 3 wounds on it, if you have Master of the Forge, then that alone can sometimes just save you that couple of CP. It can also synergize with the Tet Marine if he's got a Warlord trait such as Soul Warden, giving it an automatic shrug against mortals on a 5+. I think it's a very fun choice in terms of playing, but it's also a very pricey kit. It comes in at 250 UK, 345 US dollars, and it's time consuming and it's quite difficult to build, being that it's fine cast. You're probably going to actually need like a physical hacksaw to saw off some of the gates and stuff. So a much more in-depth project, but also a rewarding project. So a lot of decisions to be made. The Castellan could do more for slightly less points. No synergies, no repair. The Tet Marine can maybe do more all round with the Falchion. Synergies, repairing. But then I think if you look at stratagems, the Imperial Knights are going to have more stratagems that you could actually use to get some good value. And I did list a few of them, but there are so many, you probably need to pick up the Knights Codex and go through it and check them all out yourself. Please leave me a comment down below if you prefer the Falchion or the Castellan. I would love to hear it. Maybe we'll put a poll on the channel a couple of days after this video drops, so keep a lookout for that, and the community can vote and they can tell us what they think is best. If there are more videos you guys want to see with maths or other knights that you want to compare, then leave me a comment and I will do that as well. Just remember, underneath the video, there's a big join button, and for the price of a cup of coffee every month, you can really support the channel and help me out so much, and I do really appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Have a great week, brothers. I will see you in the very near future. By the blood are we made strong. Peace.